Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead is the first movie, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and we'll talk about the second movie, which I believe is coming out. And just on a personal level, and if you and you and I get to know each other in the future, you'll know I'm a guy who doesn't mix my words. And I sat literally in this room about a year and a half ago, watched that movie with my wife, and my wife, we were just reminiscing on this last night, that we actually think it was the turning point for us to actually get a juicer, to actually buy a juicer, which is sitting in our kitchen right now. So if nothing else, you basically inspired one slight cynic at the time who basically decided to put a value on his own health and his family's health and go and buy a juicer. And what impacted me about the movie was, I think it had this really cool combination between great sense of humor, because I think Australians, that's a general statement, but have, or can have a great sense of humor. You brought in a sense of vulnerability, which is rare, I see in the world, where people are trying to portray that they're perfect, and you allowed people to see a slightly more vulnerable aspect of who you are. And then you had just, real life, you were a real life, specimen, test case, case study, if you want. So it had this really cool mix about it. But before we talk about the movie, I'd love to go back prior to the movie, before the movie came into your life. And you mentioned a statement in the movie about that you were focusing on your wealth rather than your health. And I see that a lot, with the assumption that people will, chase money, and the assumption that it'll buy them the happiness. Can you give us a sense of what was going on for you at that time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I guess you have to go back to growing up. My parents were in the medical world. My dad was a surgeon, my mother was a nurse. And we were well off, but we weren't we weren't really wealthy, but we were middle class, well off. And I went to a high school which was called St. Ignatius College, Riverview. And it's like an elitist, in inverted commas, school that my mum and dad worked very hard to save up the money to be able to send me to that high school. And there I was exposed to lots of wealth. I was exposed to lots of kids in my class where their fathers owned corporations and were in this new world called investment banking. And, there were lots of fancy cars, big houses on the waterfront in Australia. And so there was probably, and I've thought about this a lot, I was like aspiring to, not knowing what I wanted to do in life, but I thought, wow, if you can have money, you can do lots of things, and it opens up lots of choices. And with that, you think comes freedom. And so I was sort of like, what am I going to do in my life? I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I know that money is an important thing. So I guess that probably the materialism drive came in my late teens, 16, 17, 18, when I was exposed to that in a full-on way. And then I left school at 17, and I didn't get enough marks to do college. So my dad gave me the option to go back and repeat to try and get a higher score, but I wasn't too keen on that. I mean, exams were not my thing. And so I was just fortunate enough to be driving down to Palm Beach, a beautiful Sydney beach, which is about 45 minutes away from where the family home was. And I heard on the radio a job that was being advertised for a Sydney Futures Exchange, get into the fast life. And I heard the ad on the radio, and I picked up the phone when I didn't have a mobile then. I picked up the phone when I landed at the house down at Palm Beach, and I called up, and next thing I know, I was in front of the chap, and I got the job. And the job was for a courier boy, like to run around the town. And I was exposed dramatically to this world of finance and stock market and futures market when I was doing the rounds, taking the tickets and picking up the mail and dropping off account statements and so on, which is what I was doing. When I was junior shit kicker, I was on $155 a week was my wage, okay? I mean, it was right down the beginning. But I was exposed to all this sort of numbers flying around, and I got a very loud voice, and I'm quite a big guy, and I was good at math, but I wasn't good at anything else at school. And what I learned very quickly on my run, on the errands, that if you were good at math and you had a loud voice, there was a place for you on the floor of the Sydney Futures Exchange. So I ended up there within 6 months, and I ended up being the youngest trader in Australia to have what's called a white badge, which is with the full certificate to be allowed to trade. And I was actually really good at it. I mean, it was just pure luck somehow that I found myself in this game that was just starting to take off. and I was really good at it. And so by the age of 19 and 20, I was making a lot of money, ridiculous amounts of money, as a salary and as a bonus working for this bank. And, because I was that age, and my parents, I really respect them. They didn't try to control me. They just, Joe will find out for himself, And essentially what happened was, by the age of 22, I went out on my own. And, in my early 20s, I was making over $500,000 a year trading my own account, like what's called a day trader nowadays, but this was in the early 80s. And of course, I was spending every cent I made because I was young and I was immature and I was drinking a lot and I was carrying on. But I was very focused on the bottom line, and I was very focused on having the new Mercedes, the watches, the clothes. It was all about appearance, and that was very, very important to me. And I actually thought, like, if you sort of go back to the 80s, you're probably a bit too young for that, Philip, but as being in the 80s, it was very much this opulent time, and brands were so important, whether it was Armani, whether it was Benz, what Rolex, whatever it was, brands were really important, and they were sort of idolized in the film and media, whether you think about like American Gigolo and these sorts of media that we were exposed to, or I was exposed to. And so I really felt that was important. And so I worked really hard, and I played hard, and I was good at it, and it came easy to me. And of course, the alcohol starts, because you're thinking you're the master of the universe, and so you start drinking too much. And I got to a point in my early 20s where I really, even though I was really good at what I did, I didn't like who I was. I remember going to a girlfriend's 21st birthday party. I think I was like 23. And I made a fool of myself. I'd been drinking all day at lunch, and I went there, and I think I had the father in a headlock, and I was, trying to make him drink, and I fell asleep into my dinner. I was an embarrassment to her. And my sister, my younger sister, was there, and she basically said, "You're an embarrassment to the family." And so that was a big wake-up call. I think I was 23, 24. That was a big wake-up call. And so then I sort of started to reevaluate life, and I felt that at that moment I sort of made some changes, and I shifted a bit, and I started to say, well, maybe I shouldn't drink, and maybe I should sort of look at other meanings in life. And so I think that moment, I didn't detach from the materialism, but I started to break away from just, being caught up in what I'd say.
Kind of questioning it.
Yeah, the brochure of life, what you think you're supposed to do, you know what I mean? Like just getting swept along in the rapid. So that, and then I guess from there, materialism still being connected to that, but maybe not so much on trying to flaunt it and trying to do it. It was more about, okay, I've got to build a nest egg. I've got to put this pressure on myself. I haven't got a university degree. I've got to do something. If I want to have children, I want to have a family. I've got to survive on my wits. So I started to save then, and I started to be a bit more responsible. And then I realized that trading, well, it's good, but this party can't go on forever, and it's also quite stressful on the body, and you're up at night, you're worried, there's a lot of anxiety. So I sort of said maybe there's a different way. So at the age of 27, I founded my first company, and that first company was a brokerage firm, and it was called United Capital Securities. And essentially, I was a trader. I was paying a lot of commissions to banks. And I kind of looked around and I said, well, why do you have to be a bank? Why don't I just set up a firm, and all these guys that are doing what I'm doing, they can become customers? And so day one, the business was profitable, very successful. And I found myself in this CEO founder role. And I had to work really hard for the first 3 or 4 years to make this successful. And I stopped going to the gym. I stopped working out in any way, shape or form. I stopped playing football. I used to play rugby. And rugby training, as you probably know, Philip, that's a big commitment. 2 nights, 3 nights a week in the gym, and you're playing on Saturday, so you can sort of eat the food and still working out at that level when you're in your sort of mid to late 20s. You can do it, right? But then as soon as you start working 70-hour weeks, and you're ordering in pizzas and the takeaway Chinese, and you're ordering in, and then you're having beers after work, and you're having cans of Coke, maybe 8 or 9 a day to try and keep you going with the caffeine, it takes its toll, and it added up. And so while the banker balance was growing, so was the girth, and so was the jean sizes and the belt buckle, and then new belts that needed to be bought. And essentially, that's where I make the reference in the movie that, you know, I was focusing on wealth, not health. I mean, I really basically was just trashing myself. I was just creating this toxic dump of just like, it doesn't matter, I'll get to it later, I'll worry about it later, I'll procrastinate on that. And so I think that it wasn't until I was 32, which is just like 4 to 5 years after founding that company, that I got sick. And it wasn't like getting sick where you just take antibiotics and then a couple of weeks later you're good again. It was getting sick, and then as soon as you go off the pills 2 weeks later, you get worse. And so the medication had to stay, and the pills had to stay, and they had to try and find the right combination of pills and the right amount of dose. And it was super high levels of steroids, you know, which, you know, if I was at 70, 80 milligrams a day, and anyone who knows anything about that, that's very high. And the side effects of that are moon face, hunchback, osteoporosis. I mean, you know, here I am, I'm 32, and I'm being told that I'm going to take pills for the rest of my life, every day, twice a day, and that my life expectancy is going to be shortened by maybe 20 years. I'll need hip replacements and knee replacements and shoulder replacements and everything, because my bones are going to possibly be eaten away. So it was not a good day, but it still wasn't enough to slow me down, which is incredible. I just went harder. And it was almost like, oh, well, I'll worry about that later. And I didn't really get the connection. I didn't put the connection together, believe it or not, which is kind of stupid in hindsight. But I didn't put the connection together that I was sick because of that. I thought I was just sick because it was just bad luck, that it was just some genetic thing, or no matter what I did, I would have got sick. It was just like, well, sick is part of what living is, so I'm just bad luck.
So it's interesting because, you know, I won't get into what I do, but people call me a life coach, this is a term I don't particularly like, but I work with people, individuals. And a lot of people come to me because they can recognize there's something wrong in their life, something not working, something not congruent. They're a little bit lost. A lot of people who basically come to me, they don't know it at the time, but they've become what they do as opposed to who they are. They've lost their identity in the business they have, or the businesses they have, and the busyness. But something really curious that I never expected to see over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, we've had a disproportionate, like in terms of, because I don't talk about health, I don't talk about juicing, I don't talk about nutrition, I don't bring speakers in to talk about nutrition, but we've had a really significant shift where clients go through this place of fighting and resisting and holding on, even though they're in the room. They then move to this place of letting go and getting in touch with some of the stuff that, for want of a better term, the fact that they don't respect themselves, they don't love themselves, they don't particularly like who they are, they don't like looking in the mirror because they don't like what they see. And they start to move through that. And I'm curious to know what your view is of this shift between what you talk about in the movie, between knowing, it wasn't the movie, it was actually an interview I saw last night of you, we all know what we need to do, but we're not necessarily doing it. And what I've seen is this emotional shift that almost needs to take place so the person actually wants to go to the gym, they want to juice, they want to look after themselves, as opposed to thinking they should or they need to. What's even your personal shift, or what you've seen in the world, if you even agree with what I'm saying?
We call it KIVD, knowing it versus doing it. We have an acronym in it, Reboot. And I think it's very poignant when it comes to this world of lifestyle choices. Now for me, I'm a smart guy. I'm not stupid. I knew that smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, drinking soda, eating pizzas, having McDonald's wasn't the best thing I could do for myself. I knew that, okay? I knew that this was something that I couldn't do forever, but I was living that illusion, if you like, where I'm young enough and later on I'll get serious about living. I'm sort of borrowing from the future now, and I'll pay it back later. Yeah. Okay? It's just like this habit that we all seem to get ourselves into. We all love debt. I mean, we've become a society that's just all about debt. You know, we want it now, worry about it later. And I think that with health, that's a big part of the psyche of us humans. Also, there is this evolutionary mismatch that's going on today in a big way. So we can't be too hard on ourselves, because we have created a society and a world around us that is very new to our species. I mean, go back 500 years, 200 years, 150 years, even 100 years. And the technologies that are available today are really we've never been exposed to having to make these decisions about the long-term impact of what it could do. So as an example of that is that, 100 years ago, it was very difficult to do something every day that would cause a detrimental effect to your health in 30 or 40 years' time. Maybe 100 years you could smoke, so maybe we go back, 150, 200 years. But to do something every day that was going to have a detrimental effect to your health was difficult to do. These days, the choices of doing that are much wider. There are so many things you can do today that give instant pleasure, that we love doing in that moment, that is freely available, that are cheap, that will cause us pain and suffering in the long run. But because it doesn't do it now, we don't think about the long run. If someone runs in now to your beautiful home here with a gun pointing at us, we're gonna fight or flight. When our instincts are going to kick in. Saber-toothed tiger runs in, I'm ducking behind the couch. Okay, you bring in 10 deep fried pizzas, no one's ducking for cover. People are running towards it. So this sort of thing we just need to be conscious of, not to beat ourselves up too much. But going back to the knowing it versus doing it, I think it's different for everyone. But from my experience, I used a time machine actually to help me. I think we all have our own time machines, and very few people access them like they should. And I didn't know how to access mine, but I worked out pretty quickly that the time machine's a valuable thing to help you. And what I mean by that is that I went back in time, and I spent time looking at photographs, thinking about my life, how I was able to, in my early 20s, see my rib cage when I looked in the mirror, how I was able to go and run 10 miles, how I was able to go out and have a big night and get up the next morning and feel fabulous and look great, and how I was able to go and take all those hits in football and get knocked, get back up, and just go on and on and on and on and on, and then have late nights and whatever after the game. And I don't know how I did it. I really don't know how I did it. But I look back when I was turned 40, which was this moment that I started using this time machine, and I look back and I went, wow, that was only 20 years ago. But how quick did that go? That went like that. That was really quick. And it was only 8 years ago that I got sick. And hang on, I've been on these pills for 8 years, and for 8 years I've been saying, one day I'll do something about this. And so, as powerful as that time machine was to go backwards, what I did was I used it to go forward and project what my life would be like at 60 if I didn't do something about it. So I used probably the fear factor, I used that against myself, and I realized that if the last 20 years, and it went like that, I went from that to this, which at the time was 320 pounds, loaded up on medication. I had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, I was pre-diabetic. I was a time bomb waiting to go off. That the next 20 years would probably go quicker than that, because to go from 20 to 40 is half your life, and to go from 40 to 60 is only a third. Yeah. So a third is shorter than a half. So it would go quicker. And if I didn't do something about it, before I'd know it, maybe I wouldn't even get there. And so that ability that I found, and it's that I don't know what happened that day. I don't know how I went into that headspace or where I found that I guess it was just a communication with myself that somehow broke through, and I was really scared, and I was really like, wow, so I was shaken to the core that I need to do something about this, because if I wait another day, I really am kidding myself. I'm just not being honest. And so it became conscious. So the knowing it really came to bear, but then I realized that the knowing it wasn't enough. It's not enough to know it. You have to do it.
You have to it's almost like you have to feel it. Like you felt scared, you got in touch with it, you felt the emotion, you felt the connection, you felt and then intellectually, you can combine both. Is that
Absolutely. Feeling it and having that. And then the doing it part is not easy because you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
There's lots of things to do, and how do you know if it's going to work?
Yeah.
And so it really was just being aware and being in that headspace of now I'm ready to do, but what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm smart. I can run businesses. And what do we do in business? I mean, you talk to people who run companies, and I think what you'll find is if you find the really successful people in life, what you'll find is that they're really good at solving problems. You see, business to me is about solving problems. Let the good stuff run and fix the problems. Yeah. And so if you're a good problem solver, you generally are good at business because you find a way to make it work. And you also need to be honest with yourself, of course, because if you're not doing the right thing, then you've got to be able to shift and turn. But that's a whole other conversation. So for me, that ability. What was the point I just made before that? Which was
you're talking about business.
Yeah, but
Problem solving.
Yeah, problem solving. Yeah. So that area of problem solving, I then, instead of thinking about my company that I needed to solve the problem, I thought about, I've got a problem. So I now need to give the same attention, the same focus that I would give my company, or at that stage companies, and I'm going to solve me. So I'm a problem. I'm a company. I'm going to put the same energy and force in and try and solve it and work it out. So I went in with gusto and decided to clear the decks on a bunch of stuff, sold a bunch of stuff, cleared, and said, really, at the end of the day, there's probably 5 things in my life that are important to me and to most people, and that's, my career, not in any order, but career, family and friends, love, self, and your health. And those 5 things, I kind of think we're all jugglers. Everyone in life's juggling those 5. And what I decided to do is it's easier to juggle 4 than 5. So I put the health one down over there and said, I'm not going to worry about that. And unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way, because if you leave one down there unattended, it brings everything down. Yeah. And so I got the health one back in and started to juggle it and started to try and see if there were ways that I could somehow get that balance back. But like most people, I'm not good on balance. And so I needed to go to an extreme first to try and find out balance. So I went from the extreme of being extremely self-deprecating and putting myself down and feeding myself food that was very low in nutrition, very high in energy, very low in nutrients, to flipping it the other way, to being very loving of myself, being very caring of myself, and to put the fuel and the information into my body that was very nutrient dense.
Because it's funny, because people talk about, you hear that word, to loving myself, and there's people who are going to watch this and they're going to do their best to dismiss it. At some level, I think intuitively we know there's some real depth to that, and I completely agree with you. Moving to a place and shifting your external focus to one of actually starting to appreciate who you are. And some people think that, number one, it's fluffy. Number two is it has a detrimental effect of our ability to focus on our businesses and to make money. My experience and the experience I've seen with the clients that I work with, as they start to put a value on their own skin, as they start to respect and love themselves, for want of a better term, the opportunities don't disappear. In fact, the opportunities to align themselves, I have a saying that we give ourselves what we feel we deserve. We give ourselves what we feel we deserve. So they start to demand more for themselves in terms of where they live, the relationships they find themselves, the business they go after. And typically, if they stay in that process, they stay in that journey, they stay in that mountain of climbing that mountain to respect themselves, they start to look at their life from a career standpoint and start to question whether the thing they do from a monetary standpoint brings them meaning or enough meaning. So you're sitting here today, your movie's been watched by over 12 million people, I believe.
They reckon 20 now.
20 million, okay, excuse me, 20 million
That's
people, and maybe 21 by the time we're finished this,
exactly.
At the way it's going, and you've got your second movie coming out. Give us a sense of what it feels like to, like, if you close your eyes and just think about the enormity of what you've created, which my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't like you didn't see it, you didn't have a vision board of it and everything else. And it actually brings, actually just on a side note about goal setting, because I think sometimes goals are great, but I think goals sometimes take us away from our ability to be in the present. And secondly is, they don't allow this space to be created by, creating this space to allow what happens. Where if you're so fixed in the goal, I think sometimes you miss opportunities.
Yeah.
So you're sitting here today, you've impacted millions of people around the world. How does that feel?
It's a difficult thing for me sometimes to put into words, because I'm also very conscious that I haven't done a lot yet in terms of, I still have so much I feel that I can do, that I kind of feel that once you start to sit back and think of what you've done, you're sort of taking away from what you're going to do. And it's sort of like this patting on your back and giving yourself, this self-admiration club. So I'm very conscious of that. But at the same time, I look at it as very much a team effort, that I've got a great group of people around me, that it's family as well as friends, as well as people who work with me. So it's not just me, it's a team effort that's been able to achieve this. No man's an island, and I'm not an island. So I think about it as a team effort. I think that the entrepreneurial nature of myself, like my ability to take risks, which I learnt early on in those days of trading, has something that served me very well, because I wasn't going to make a movie. I was going to go and do the change. Putting the camera on myself was a afterthought. It wasn't like I'm going to make a movie about this change. It was like, I need to change. I'm going to find out what I need to do. I went and did the work. I used logic. I used the business things that we talked about common sense. And okay, I'm fat and I'm sick. I'm nearly dead. Okay, fat. I've got to like stop eating and exercise and stop eating crap. And then sick, I've got to put more nutrients in. And this whole combination of juicing versus plants versus eating that and not eating this was kind of like logical. But then how do you do it? And then when I told people what I was going to do, a mate of mine said, you should film that, because you're not alone and you can tell a story and this could be powerful. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that.
That's very evident now that I get to see you, face to face, and you talk about, how does it feel, and you straight away go to your team and you go to the team effort and everything else is that ego. And I don't necessarily need you to comment on it, but I love the fact that, one of the things was bringing in a character who was obviously named Phil in the first movie, and you kind of just stepped away, and you allowed this guy to shine. That's something that I think, whether you planned it strategically or it happened accidentally, I think it's something that's great, because people in a teaching role on a stage or whatever, they often start to believe their own hype. It starts to consume them. They start to get pushed up onto a pedestal. Yeah. They allow it to happen. People do it to them. And as you get further up that pyramid, you look around, there's no one around you. Professionals, whether it's priests in Ireland in the early 70s, when they walked down the street, you had to step off the pavement. Doctors and dentists were treated like they were some sort of walking gods. I see it in celebrity today. It wasn't a question I planned, but even on that, Joe, do you find that people, excuse the way maybe I asked this question, but do you find people put you on a pedestal? I often feel that when they do that to me, when I speak at a conference, they come up and they want my photograph with them, and it's fine if they want to respect and everything else, but I find sometimes they give so much away of themselves. They put me on a pedestal and they're almost disrespecting themselves. Is that something you have any reference to? Or?
Probably not as that extreme, but I am like because this is a relatively new thing for me. This only has happened, since really 2011 when the movie went viral. So, we're now about to close out 2014, so it's only been like 3 years of being in this position. It's very new. Like, think about being 45, 44, and that changing where people recognize you. I've got to remind myself. Yeah. I don't wake up in the morning thinking that if I walk down the street, people are going to know who I am. I'm not at that point. I think if you're like Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks, that's kind of ingrained into you that if you go somewhere, you're going to be recognized. They've lived with that. So from that point of view, I understand that world, but that is still foreign to me. So, I find myself, I get frustrated like the next person, and I'm frustrated in lines. I don't like lining up, and customs annoys me. But I've got to be careful now that I can't do my block, because the other day I was coming to LA and not this trip before, and I was really frustrated because there was like just 3 guys working, and there was like, it was like 200 people ahead of me, and I was there for like an hour and a half in the line to come into the US. And I was going to say something, I thought, it's not this guy's fault. I was actually going to say, listen, can you explain to me why there's just 3 guys working? Because this is just not efficient, and this is like welcoming. And I was going to, but I thought, your customs, you don't want to. So I get up there, and before I could say anything, the guy goes, oh, I love your movie, and I've done the juice. So here was I possibly going to say something that was probably not going to be pleasant. Yeah. And I realised that this guy looks at me in maybe a different way. So I'm very careful about that now.
Well, it's funny, you and I have so many things in common. Well, a number of little things in common, or significant things. One is my mother's side is from County Clare on the west coast of Ireland. Number 2 is I'm going to say I was disastrous at school. I'm not saying you were disastrous, but you weren't great. Bad. I failed pretty much every exam, didn't go to college as a result, etc., etc. But the only thing that differs in our LA stories in the airport is this one, is I was in LA about 2 months ago. I'm walking through LA, and I look over and I catch this guy's eyes, and he literally kind of gets his computer, puts it down, and he looks at me just as if it's Christmas Day and I'm dressed as Santa, and he comes up, and honestly my ego kicked in. I went, this guy recognized me, saw me on a stage speaking or whatever, or he's seen one of my videos or whatever, and he walks up to me and he goes, how you doing? And I said, I'm great. And he goes, where did you get those pants? And I put it on Facebook, and people said, my wife said, I can't believe you put that on Facebook, because it was like taking the piss out of myself, or making fun of myself. But it was like the complete opposite to what you've had. But I hope, let's assume that I see you in 2 or 3 years' time. I hope nothing changes, because my one experience with speakers, not all speakers, but a number of them, is when they get bigger and bigger and bigger, as they tend to. It's never intentional. No one wakes up with the decision or the idea that they're going to lose themselves in their message, but sometimes it happens. It can consume them.
On this is that I don't see myself as an expert. And maybe that's just a different disposition, because I actually don't think I'm an expert on anything. I think what I've tried to do is, I'm very fortunate now to have a platform where I can go out and I can talk to people, and I've got some questions that I want to get answered. And so I'm on a mission to try and find out stuff, and I'm lucky to have a platform that people are listening, and so I'm trying to use that platform to find out stuff on behalf of them as well.
Yes.
And so rather than try and say I've got the answers, my message is I'm trying to help you and me find the answers.
It's funny, I often, the work I do is I just put all the emphasis back on the clients. Probably almost, some of the clients have said almost too much. You don't take any credit, and people give me way too much credence and credit for the work that I do. I draw the answers out of them. That's my job, my gift, my skill, whatever you want to call that. But probably one of the most defining moments for me and on a speaking front was when I was in Toronto about 6 months, about a year ago, and I spoke and I came back and something shifted in me, and I came back to my wife, and the first thing out of my mouth when I walked in the door was, I said, I've reframed speaking. And I wasn't an intellectual, I was actually emotionally. And she says, what do you mean? And I said, every time I stand on a stage, I used to see it as an opportunity. Now I see it as an absolute privilege. Yeah. To be able to stand in front of 1 or 1,000 people and to be able to speak and share a message. And the minute I did that, it's just like I've got more opportunities come my way. It's amazing. I want to shift a little bit personally, and the reason being is not to try to in any way, shape or form expose you. Sure. But you voluntarily allowed yourself to be vulnerable in the first movie. And I think there's something about vulnerability that's missing in the world today. And I think if it's authentic and real, I think it can inspire people in a very different way, because they get to see somebody in a powerful or a teaching role or a public role that say, oh, hang on a second, I don't see them as any less. I see them as more, because they now show me that they're human and they can relate to that person a little bit more. I just have
in males as well. It's more in females than it has been in males.
Yes. So I just have a couple of random questions, sure. And again, if whatever you're comfortable with in terms of, so give me the idea, give me a sense of a bad day for Joe. What's a bad day for Joe, or a challenging day for you?
I think that I probably overextend myself time-wise. I probably need more time for me, and I sort of give too much of my time, so I get frustrated with myself that I'm spreading myself too far, too thin. Bad day would be just having the mountain of emails. I probably feel like under pressure, I guess, that too much going on and not being able to be on top of it. So probably if I'm now trying to explain in a simpler words, it's probably not being in control. Because I'm probably a bit of a control freak, that I like to have things in order. I like to make sure that I'm on top of my messages to the fans in Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram. I like to be on top of my emails. I like to be on top of my meetings. I don't have to be running late. I like things to be in order. And so a bad day for me is when 2 or 3 things early on throw the whole thing out, and I'm on the chase the whole day, and I'm up till 3 in the morning, and I'm tired and frustrated, and that's probably a bad day. There can be bad days on food sometimes too, when I might say to myself in the beginning of the day, I'm going to work out for now and I'm going to do this, and none of those 2 things happen. Yeah. I've learnt now much better at not beating myself up about it, so that can be a bad day. Another bad day for me can be when not many people in the world can frustrate me, but my mother is a world champion at it, and so she can say things on a phone call to me that can really put me into another whole world. I think mothers have that sort of power with sons, and maybe daughters, I don't know. But so I think that a bad day can happen, and she doesn't mean to do it by any means, but she's basically saying, when are you coming home? And I now feel, because I'm not home, I feel guilty, and so then I get stressed, and so they're probably bad days. They're bad days to me. So letting somebody down, and feeling like I'm not in control of the day the way I wanted it to go, and so I'm getting better at adjusting to that. But I don't know. Probably they're my bad days.
Mums. I'm sure it's daughters as well, as you said. But like my mother used to say to me, I left Ireland. I left a family business. We were making lots of money, building a big business. I was a part of that, a small part of that, but. Basically came to Canada with a dream and of speaking and connecting to people, and had absolutely nobody over here, no connections. I'd spend the next couple of years being on the phone to my mom, and even to this day. And I get my first speaking event, and there might be like 10 people in the room, and there's no way I'm getting paid for it. I'm always paying to speak, in those days. And every time I get on my mother and I say, "What are you doing?" I say, "I'm speaking in such and such a place," or whatever. Are you getting paid?
Yeah.
Are you getting paid? I just wanted to kill my mother. Yeah. I know she's watching this potentially right now, but I wanted to kill her, because I was all about serving, and I still am. I mean, my wife's an accountant technically, and she'll literally tell you that money. I sometimes say it's not important. It's important to a point, but it's never been my driver, never will be. And her first question will be, "Are you getting paid? Yeah. Are you getting paid?" In other words, you're not of value unless you're getting paid, irrespective of whether she meant it or not.
My mum still asks me, "Are people paying to see the movie? You're not giving it for free, are you?" And I'm like, "Well, Mum, the way it works, I know sometimes you got to."
What, like, looking back in your life, even I had a few questions here which almost have become slightly irrelevant in one sense, and where it's come from is that, how have you dealt with that whole piece of not being comfortable in your own skin? Because I know you refer to this turning point in your life, which is very much around health and everything else, but you got to that place because you weren't comfortable in your own skin, you didn't particularly like yourself, or whatever terms you want to use. What work have you done? And I don't mean what programs have you gone to, what retreats you will, but what if somebody's sitting at home, they're watching this, they have a lot of weight on them, for example, which we could argue is a representation of how they feel about themselves emotionally. What either is the thing that you did, or the shift that had to happen internally for you, or what is the thing that you feel that people need to shift from a very deep emotional sense?
So I guess that I was, I was fortunate, and once again, luck plays a bit of a role in a lot of our lives. And anyone who's successful who doesn't think luck plays a role, I'd like to talk to them about that philosophy, because I think luck plays a big role. And luck can be sometimes just a person you meet in a conversation you have that can spark an idea or a thought. And I think that I started asking a lot of questions after that story I told you earlier about me being, out of control in my early 20s. I started asking a lot of questions about life in my mid-20s. And I realized that you sort of have to work at yourself to not only to learn, but to try and grow, I guess. The growth, your body grows, but your spirit, your personality, all of those things grow as well, but you have power over shifting them in where they're going to grow. And so I learnt that early on, that we can control our nature, our feelings. We have a lot more say in this than you think. So I think that was important to be able to have that. That served me well later on. So that's probably something that I would try and talk to people about that inner power to really shift. I use the word perspective. I think perspective is a word that's underrated. It's not used enough. And so I use perspective a lot in my life. About when I'm having a bad day, I go, well, there's other people having worse days than me. And let's zoom out a bit. Let's see what's really going on in the world. And, well, how can I get upset at that? So I use that a lot, you know. And so I think that trying to gain a perspective, I think that's important. I know I'm probably not hitting it. I mean, there's, you know, I guess that when I talk to somebody and they're in trouble, I try to I tell them this little rule that I try to live by, which is you don't learn anything new, you just remember what you've forgotten. And what that means is that if you have the faith that all the answers to all the big things in your life are within you, and you take that as a given, because I believe that. I believe that all the answers to all the biggest problems in your world, you have the answer. Yeah. You just haven't been able to get it to the surface. So what you've got to try and do is seek out people who can help you draw that answer out. And so if you're not with people, you know, it could be a husband, could be a wife, could be a best friend, could be people or colleagues, and you're not finding answers, then you've got to maybe broaden your horizons and you've got to try and find different groups. I'm not saying change your friends, I'm just saying broaden the circle and go on a discovery. Find out. I mean, ask questions, you know. There's an old saying which I don't agree with, okay? It's like, it's better to sit there and let people think you're an idiot rather than open your mouth and prove it. Now, I don't agree with that. I reckon you open your mouth and prove it, because I reckon the only way that I've learned in life is by asking dumb questions. And so I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of exploring, and, you know, I was, you know, mocked a lot at school. So I'm used to people thinking, you know, that I'm not good enough. I'm used to that. So it sort of brought off a duck's back to me, because I was well trained at that in school. Yeah. So I have no fear of that sort of that feeling. So I guess I would say to people that there's much more. You're in control of much more than you possibly think, and if somehow you can believe in yourself and really believe, not just believe because someone's telling you to believe, but really believe in yourself, I think that is incredibly powerful. And, you know, that's something that can play a huge role in your success moving forward and creating the shift that you're talking about.
It's interesting because I've never trademarked a word or a saying in my life. In fact, I have a little bit of an issue with trademarks. I think it's, you know, I appreciate that there's a need to do it in business, but it's almost like I feel guilty of trademarking words so other people can't use it. I almost feel I don't have the right to do that, but I did trademark "Believe in You," which is a tagline that I use.
That's a great tagline.
I just love it, and it's in essence, it's about really shifting the value. If I talk about perspective, it's an interesting story I often refer to is Rory McIlroy. I know you're a golfer. I saw it on, I think it was on Facebook, a photograph of you in Sydney the other day playing golf.
But I try to be one.
Well, that's another thing we have in common. But I always remember Rory when he collapsed on the last day of the Masters. He had probably the biggest collapse on the last day of the Masters, lost the greatest lead in Masters history in the final day. And then he did something absolutely extraordinary. He not just came back and won a tournament, he came back and won the next major 3 months later. And I just went on a mission to find out, because I intuitively felt that this guy didn't change his grip. He didn't get a new golf swing, golf coach. He didn't change his equipment. At that point, he did change it later. And I dug. And I ultimately, and I suppose it brings me into a question, and it's almost my final question, but it's he basically went to Haiti. And he said in that moment, he said he remember standing over watching a kid or watching a mother who'd lost a kid, whatever it was, I can't remember exactly the detail. And he looked at it, and in that moment, he said, it's just an effing game. Yeah. And it allowed him to let it go. I believe personally is that when we can bring more meaning into our lives, and I break it into three elements: the relationship with ourselves, the relationship with other people, and ultimately the work that we do. If we can start to bring some more meaning into those areas, those elements of our life, the byproduct is happiness. You've gone from a place of, working in the stock market, opening and closing businesses or whatever, other business activities you've had. I'm not saying there was no meaning for it. Do you think your happiness has grown because you're now serving people through the work you do?
No doubt. I thought you were going to ask me, what do you think the secret to happiness is? And it's an interesting question because I get asked it a lot. And I sort of have this theory that happiness is not really what we're all about, because happiness is a sort of a fleeting moment. They happen in times. You can't just always have happiness. It just doesn't work that way, right? But you can always have meaning, and you can always have a purpose. People can't take away your meaning or your purpose from you. They can take away happiness from you, right? But they can't take away meaning and purpose from you. And also, I would say that the secret to happiness is being useful. And I think that is, it might be simple, but I think to me, it just sums it up. Because the more useful we are, whether we're useful to ourselves, useful to others, or useful in the work that we do for the world, that's to me what gives us meaning and gives us purpose, and therefore we can be rewarded with moments of happiness and times where happiness can stay for periods. It's once again, it's perspective. It all comes down to perspective. If you ask me over the last 12 months, have I generally been happy? I say, yeah, I've been happy. If you said to me, was there a time in the last 2 weeks you aren't happy? I'd say, sure. Standing in the line yesterday at customs, So there's it's a relative thing.
Yeah.
And when I ask parents, I think it's an interesting way that when you ask someone not about themselves but about others, and you say, what do you want for your kids? And what's the most common answer?
I want them to be happy.
I want them to be happy. And so I say, what is that? And then it gets a bit wobbly from there. But at the end of the day, if you have a kid, I haven't got any right now, but if I did have a son or a daughter, I'd want them to be useful. I want them to have a dream, and I'm not too concerned whether the dream's met or not, but I want them to have a dream and to have some direction or some purpose in life where they are heading towards it, and they at least feel that it's achievable. And not many of us, get our dreams. That's why they're called dreams. So we need to manage our expectations on that, so that we don't, I'm very concerned. Maybe concerned is the wrong word. I'm alarmed. I think that this world we're in now with social media, there is so many good things about it, but there's also so many dangerous things that we need to be very careful about. This world of Instagram now, where people are so freely showing their lives. And there are people in this world that have incredible wealth and incredible lives, but they're kind of like this many. And then there's this many that don't have that. And in the old days, the masses never saw what the others had.
That's a great point, yeah.
But in today's world, the masses are seeing what they don't have. And that can create a lot of instability when you see what you don't have. Because not knowing what you don't have doesn't affect you. But once you know what you don't have, that's a problem.
Speaking to a mother the other day, and this whole thing of guilt, that people are just riddled with guilt in the world today. Fathers for not being home, and when they are home, they feel disconnected at home, so they're feeling guilt. And mothers feeling that they're trying to be professionals and parents, and they feel like they're falling between two stools. And there was one woman the other day was chatting about, she says, every time I turn on Facebook, there's one friend's doing organic cookie days with their kids, and the other one's whatever. And I said, well, the reality is they're probably showing the best part of their lives.
Yeah, of course.
I was in Silicon Valley last year, and I said, I hope you're, I wasn't trying to be condescending to the audience, it wasn't my intent. I think that's how it came across. I said, I hope your lives are half as happy as you pretend they are on Facebook every day.
Sure.
Of course, no one laughed. It didn't go down that well, and I had to change the subject pretty pretty quickly, but I was trying to make a point that
It's so true.
we put the good foot forward on Facebook. And yeah, honestly, I think I do it myself.
Of course we do.
You know, but it is interesting. Last question for you. What's the secret of happiness? I'm joking. You already covered that one. If you had one last message, you don't have kids, but if you literally, this is the last opportunity you had on camera, and I apologize for, it's not an easy question necessarily, but if there was one message, one thought, one request, one thing that you would leave the world with today, what would it be?
Never been asked that question before. I would. I think I'm leaning. My gut feel is leaning towards being grateful and appreciating things, not taking it for granted. So there's almost like a consciousness about being present in the moment versus worrying too much about the future or the past. It's more about being here and now would be the thing that I'm trying to do the most. It's not easy because we all have worries about what we're going to do here or there, or how we're going to pay that bill, or what's little Johnny's going to do, and all those things. So I think that the thing that if I was like, my last words on camera, I'm going to go on a plane tomorrow, it's going to go down, and this is the last interview, I'd say that I'm trying to be present more, and that seems to be working for me. And I'm just trying to focus on the now. There's that great saying, you know, the past is history, the future a mystery, now is a gift, and that's why they call it the present. And I don't know who wrote it, I think it's anonymous, whatever, but I like it, and it sort of sums up. So it's this idea of just being aware and conscious today, being grateful, walking around, realizing that I can walk, that I have got eyesight, that I've got hearing that works, I've got arms and legs, you know. It's just being incredibly thoughtful and thankful.
And speaking of being thankful and grateful, I appreciate you being here. We didn't talk about the new movie. I kind of chose not to go there because I think by just getting to know you a little bit more, people will be drawn to it. But your new movie is coming out when?
In November 18 around the world on iTunes and paid video on demand platforms, and then it'll be subscription like Netflix in 2015.
Okay.
And so it's exciting. It's unusual to do a sequel to a documentary. There's not too many documentaries that have a two, so we did a bit of a challenge there. But you know, I think it's we'll see what the fans. I mean, it's now in the hands of the fans. I mean, they would now judge.
Well, I suspect I haven't seen it, and I've heard a little preview of it and watched a little video about it. But I suspect it's going to be great. And Australians have impacted my life. One of the best memories I ever had was going around the world years ago and working in the wine business and learning how to juice from a slightly different perspective. From a gentleman called Peter Lehman, who was a winemaker. So I worked with the Lehmans and I got to know their family very well, and I've been back to weddings in Australia. And then obviously you've impacted me, and James from Food Matters and Hungry for Change has impacted me on a much healthier juice coming out of, in terms of as a place of inspiration. So I really appreciate that. I'm very grateful for you taking the time, really am. And, again, we didn't know each other until today.
Well, you're doing great work, so keep it up. Well, I like your message and I like your delivery. You're very good at communicating.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and thanks for taking the time.
All right, mate. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.